Forget the movie posters. Real cowboys didn't ride the plains with gleaming Colts on their hips and nothing else to trust. They lived with dust in their lungs, danger in their shadow, and steel hidden everywhere a careful eye wouldn't think to check. Most folks saw the big iron. Almost no one saw the backups, the quiet tools, the tucked blades, the secret rigs that kept a working man alive when the trail turned ugly or the night held its breath. These weren't props. They weren't trophies. They were the small, stubborn pieces of gear that kept a rider on horseback instead of under the soil. Today, we're pulling back the leather and canvas to uncover 15 hidden weapons and pieces of gear cowboys relied on when the obvious gun wasn't enough. No legends, no gunfighter glamour, just the dirt-level truth of the tools that stayed out of sight until the moment they mattered. So settle your weight in the saddle, check the wind, and look down, because the first weapon rode closer than a heartbeat. Number 15, boot-top derringers. Steel in the heel. Down where the leather rubbed raw and trail dust gathered, some cowboys kept a last resort hidden where no stranger's hand would ever think to search. Inside the boot. Boot-top derringers weren't meant for clean shots or careful aim. They were meant for moments where distance vanished, a card cheat lunging across a table, a ranch hand ambushed behind a barn, or a drunk grabbing for a man's belt gun before fists had even finished rising. Many cowboys wrapped these tiny pistols in cloth, not just to soften the rub, but to keep sweat from corroding the metal. And during long cattle drives, when boots stayed on for days at a time, that cloth could be the reason the gun still fired when needed. Riders working night guard often relied on these little pistols more than they admitted. If a stampede broke out or shadows moved around the herd, a boot gun could be drawn while a rider was still half tangled in his slicker. Drawing from the boot took practice. Some riders drilled at night with unloaded pistols, leaning forward from the saddle or crouching in their bedrolls to find the angle that wouldn't cost them a toe. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't noble. But when trouble pinned a cowboy to the floorboards or knocked him off his horse, the heels sometimes bit back harder than the main gun ever could. Number 14, Hatbrim knives. The edge above the eyes. Most men kept their steel at the waist. A few stitched theirs where manners lived, under the brim of a hat. Hatbrim knives appear in frontier stories and in a handful of preserved hat bands with slits worn smooth by metal. Thin, flat blades slid into hidden sheaths beneath the brim or crown. They weren't fighting knives. They were slicing tools made for one quick, decisive motion when distance collapsed. Trail hands drifting between outfits often slept near strangers. In crowded bunkhouses, a knife stitched into a hat kept a man armed, even if he stripped to his long johns for the night. A simple reach upward was all it took. Some riders kept these blades sharp enough to cut rawhide, trim rope, or free a snagged rein without digging through pockets or saddlebags. A knife worn in the hat wasn't just a backup. It was an everyday tool that stayed close even when a man's hands were full. A respectful tip of the hat could hide more than courtesy. Some cowboys rode with a blade resting inches above their eyes, quiet insurance against a night that went sideways before anyone drew a pistol. Rare, yes, but on a frontier where drifted hands slept beside strangers, a hat-brim knife wasn't a flourish. It was foresight. Number 13, saddle skirt pistols, guns under the leather. A cowboy's saddle was more than a seat. It was the one piece of equipment he trusted longer than any foreman or trail boss. And for some, it hid their backup weapon. Under the broad leather skirts that covered the saddle tree, cowboys stitched narrow holsters or tucked small revolvers behind reinforced flaps. From the side, nothing looked unusual, just the natural curve of leather molded by years of riding. Some riders kept percussion pistols here simply because they hated the weight on their hips during long drives. Others used the skirt holster as a fast grab weapon if they had to remount quickly after a scuffle or a spooked horse. This hidden pistol wasn't for standoffs in the street. It was for ambushes on the trail, when rustlers burst from mesquite or bullets snapped out of shadowed draws before a cowboy's hand reached his hip. If a rider was thrown, the skirt pistol was often the first thing he could grab while scrambling in the dirt. And if thieves demanded he hand over his belt gun, the saddle still kept its secret, as long as he stayed close to his horse. Cowboys spent more hours with their saddle than with most people. It made sense that some trusted it to carry the steel no one else needed to see. Number 12. Compact gunsmith kits, the trailside lifeline. A revolver wasn't much use if it failed in the rain. That's why some cowboys carried what outsiders never noticed, tiny gunsmith kits wrapped tight in pocket-sized rolls. Short screwdrivers, a punch or two, a vial of oil, a rag, a spare spring. Just enough to keep a gun cycling after black powder fouling or a hard day's ride. Catalogs sold proper sets, but most cowboys made their own from trimmed nails, bits of file, and scraps of wood. A kit didn't need to be pretty. It needed to work when the wind cut cold and daylight faded fast. On winter drives, these little kits kept revolvers alive when freezing fog turned moving parts sluggish. And during long trail pushes, riders used them to tighten rattling screws before a day's work shook them loose. Some even kept their kit wrapped inside a boot or tucked under a saddle flap, trusting that if their belt gun faltered, their hands would know exactly where to reach. Picture 4 riders hunched around a low fire, a revolver stripped open on a saddle blanket, that little tool roll the only thing standing between them and riding unarmed through rough country come morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept iron alive long enough to matter. Number 11. Throwdown guns, the weapon that told its own story. Not every hidden gun was carried to save a life. Some were carried to shape the story that followed. Throwdown guns sit in the murkier corners of frontier lore, mentioned in memoirs, whispered in saloons, and occasionally hinted at in court records. Cheap pistols, unreliable derringers, and broken revolvers were kept not for firing, but for framing what happened after smoke cleared. Sometimes a ranch hand carried one simply because he feared trouble on the trail, not from strangers, but from the men he rode with. A found weapon could turn a dispute into a defensible fight if the wrong eyes were watching. In mining camps and disputed cattle country, stories spread about throwdowns being tossed near bodies not to deceive lawmen, but to cool tempers among armed friends who demanded answers too quickly. Most cowboys stayed far from such scheming. Honest hands had no patience for tricks that followed a man for life. But in rough towns where law rode 2 steps behind trouble, the idea lingered like smoke after a brawl. A throwdown gun wasn't about accuracy. It wasn't about honesty. It was about survival in places where justice was as thin as a desert shadow. Number 10. Hidden tallow and grease tins. Weatherproofing the West. Black powder fouling, desert dust, prairie mud, sleet, freezing rain. The frontier hit guns harder than most gunfights ever did. That's why many cowboys hid small tins of tallow or grease in their coat linings, wagon boxes, or saddle flaps. Rendered beef fat, bear grease, or homemade mixtures stiffened with beeswax all worked the same way, sealing out moisture and keeping revolvers cycling when weather tried to glue the metal shut. Before thunderstorms rolled in, cowboys dabbed grease along cylinder pins, hammer joints, and threads where dampness liked to hide. A thin coat kept grit from locking a gun mid-draw. On winter drives, when iron stiffened before dawn, riders warmed tins near the fire just long enough to soften them. A finger's smear along a sticky trigger or frozen latch could mean the difference between a gun that barked and a gun that choked. These tins weren't glamorous pieces of kit. They smelled of smoke and animal fat and left stains no soap could lift. But in a world where guns jammed faster than tempers, that little puck of grease could be worth more than a clean shot. Cowboys trusted steel, but steel trusted grease. Number 9. Coat lining holsters. Steel behind the seams. A cowboy's duster wasn't just a shield against dust and rain. Sometimes it hid the only weapon he could rely on when the obvious gun was out of reach. Coat-lining holsters were stitched into the inside seams of long coats and jackets, hidden pockets shaped for knives, derringers, or short-barreled revolvers. Some were tailor-made in towns like Dodge or Denver. Others were homemade, cut and sewn by hand on kitchen tables. These concealed rigs kept weapons flat against the ribs, silent and invisible unless the coat was turned inside out. And on cold nights, the warmth from a man's body kept the gun dry enough to fire even when sleet soaked everyone else's gear. In saloons with strict no-gun rules, a cowboy could check his holster at the door and still sit at a table with steel inches from his heart. Barkeepers rarely suspected the quiet man leaning on the bar, the one whose coat never sagged, never bulged, yet carried more than anyone guessed. Some riders used coat liners during cattle disputes, when riding unarmed was part of the agreement. The belt gun stayed at camp. The hidden one stayed with the cowboy. A man wearing one looked unarmed until the moment he chose not to be. Number 8. Filed down frontier shivs, steel born from scraps. On the frontier, steel was precious, and cowboys used every shard of it. Filed down shivs came from broken tools, discarded metal, or scraps hammered flat on a ranch anvil. Old files were perfect, already hardened, already narrow, ready to be shaped into something sharp enough to matter. Cowboys ground these makeshift blades against stones, wagon steps, or even the sides of their spurs. Rawhide or cloth wrapped the handle. Pitch sealed the binding. A tool meant for carving wood or trimming rope could turn into a last resort weapon in less than an hour. Some cowhands kept two, one for work, one hidden in clothes or tack. The work blade dulled from chores. The hidden blade stayed sharp and untouched, reserved for the moment when a hand closed around a throat or a revolver pinned uselessly in its holster. These shivs weren't showpieces. They were silent tools for silent moments, the kind that happened behind barns, in crowded bunkhouses, or during fights that turned dirty before anyone saw a gun clear leather. They weren't meant for intimidation. They were meant for survival in places where conversations ended abruptly and darkness answered first. Number 7. Bedroll hideout guns, the blanket surprise. A cowboy's bedroll carried his comfort and sometimes his last line of defense. Canvas and wool layers wrapped tight around small pistols kept them silent and invisible. At night, the roll unwrapped near the fire, placed under the arm, or used as a pillow. Anyone approaching camp thought they saw nothing but bedding, but to the cowboy half asleep beside it, that hidden pistol was closer than his boots or saddle, closer than the rifle leaning against a wagon hub, closer than anything except his own heartbeat. Some cowboys traveling through dangerous towns kept their main gun in plain sight and their real gun in the bedroll, knowing a thief would go for the visible prize first. Others rotated hiding spots nightly, slipping the pistol deeper into the wool to keep wandering hands from noticing the weight. Night riders and rustlers often targeted camp while men slept. A bedroll hideout meant a cowboy didn't have to stumble through the dark searching for his revolver. His fingers found the grip before his eyes fully opened. In a world where the fire's glow faded quickly and night sounds blurred into threat, the bedroll gun meant a cowboy never truly slept unarmed. Number 6. False bottom saddlebags, the outlaw's drawer. Not all saddlebags carried rope, jerky, and shirts. Some carried secrets. False bottom saddlebags were two-layered traps for the curious. The top compartment held everyday gear. The hidden chamber beneath held everything else. A narrow seam or stiffened flap was the only difference between an honest saddlebag and a deceptive one. To a quick searcher, nothing seemed unusual. Even a lawman rifling through a rider's belongings might miss the concealed space unless he pressed exactly where the leather rose a fraction higher. Some riders used these compartments to carry cash from ranch to ranch, avoiding the prying hands of camp thieves. Others hid extra ammunition or cartridges they didn't want counted by trail bosses who rationed gear tight. Smugglers carrying whiskey or untaxed tobacco favored false bottoms as well. Outlaw trails were full of men who knew that losing their saddlebag meant losing their livelihood. False bottoms weren't standard issue, but the frontier wasn't full of standard men. Sometimes survival meant hiding the truth beneath a layer of leather. Number 5. Double carry weapon belts, the second line of leather. From the front, a cowboy's gun belt looked ordinary. Cartridge loops, a holster, weathered leather creased by long rides. But some belts carried a secret beneath the surface. Double carry belts were built with a second hidden strap sitting flush behind the visible one. Holster checks in certain towns focused only on the outer layer. Few men unbuckled the entire belt, and fewer still inspected it closely enough to notice another strip of leather hugging the waist. On the inner strap rode palm pistols, compact knives, extra ammunition, or tools a cowboy didn't want found. If troublemakers disarmed a rider by taking his main holster, they assumed the job was done. They never realized the outfit they'd left him wearing was more dangerous than it looked. Some ranch detectives favored these belts when escorting payrolls. Others wore them through towns known for rough welcomes, knowing a pat-down might remove the showy gun, but not the real one. A few trail bosses even required trusted wranglers to carry backups this way during volatile cattle drives when tempers ran high and gunplay could break out over a misplaced rope. 2 belts, one visible truth, one hidden one, always within reach. Number 4. Hidden shotgun pistols, the cut-down thunder. Some weapons were made to last generations. This wasn't one of them. Hidden shotgun pistols were brutal, improvised hybrids, full-size shotguns sawed down until they fit beneath dusters or wagons. A short pair of barrels, a trimmed or carved grip, and a weight that made every shot feel like a hammer swung against the wrist. Cowboys kept them under wagon seats for guarding supplies, or in barn corners for confronting rustlers in tight spaces. Stage drivers, especially on dangerous runs, sometimes hid one within arm's reach to end a robbery before it began. One blast filled a room with smoke and authority, leaving no debate about who controlled the next few seconds. Even outlaws hesitated when they heard the flat, brutal cough of a sawed-down shotgun. There was no guessing where its spread of shot might land. These weapons weren't common, they weren't admired, they weren't even particularly safe. But for a cowboy who might confront danger at arm's length in a doorway or cramped shed, the raw stopping power outweighed the risk. A hidden shotgun pistol wasn't carried often, but when it appeared, the fight usually ended right there. Number 3. Hollowed-out book pistols, the ledger that bit back. Books carried stories, some carried steel. Cowboys who lodged in boarding houses or drifted through towns with enemies often kept a book close by, Bible, ledger, or dime novel. But certain volumes were heavier than they looked. Hollowed books hid cavities carved into tightly cut pages. Some were crude, edges ragged where a pocket knife chewed through paper. Others were cleanly cut, felt-lined, almost elegant in their deception, the work of someone who'd practiced the trick more than once. A derringer or pocket revolver sat inside, resting quiet beneath paper that hid its outline. A man reading in bed or sitting beside a window looked harmless until the cover fell open in his hand and the shine of steel appeared where words should be. Men traveling with money or secrets favored these book pistols too. When rooms were shared and belongings piled together, a weapon disguised as a harmless novel was less likely to go missing or be searched out of curiosity. It wasn't everyday cowboy gear, but in tight quarters, boarding rooms, and town nights where footsteps paused too long outside a door, a book that bit back was worth its weight in lead. Number 2. Sleeve guns, the spring-loaded. Last word. Sleeve guns walk the line between myth and reality. Rare, unpredictable, but not entirely fiction. These rigs strapped along the forearm under a coat or shirt. A small pistol slid on a narrow track, held by a catch that released when the wearer flicked a finger or jerked the wrist. In a crowded room where a holstered gun announced its presence, a sleeve gun stayed invisible until the last possible moment. A cowboy sitting at a poker table looked harmless. A ranch foreman negotiating with strangers appeared unarmed. Yet both could bring steel to hand faster than a man could blink. Dust clogged springs. Sweat rusted metal. A sudden wrong movement could send the gun sliding too soon. But cowboys who dealt with gamblers, hired guns, or range rivals sometimes took that risk, trusting the mechanism more than the company they kept. Some detectives working under borrowed names used sleeve rigs when operating inside saloons or gambling halls where showing iron meant trouble. Concealment let them survive in rooms where every man watched every hand. It wasn't common, it wasn't comfortable. But in tight rooms where being unarmed meant vulnerability, the sleeve gun delivered one last quiet advantage: a hidden word in a noisy world. Number 1. Hidden saddle horn compartments. The cowboy's secret safe. Most people gripped a saddle horn without a second thought. They never guessed some horns were hollow. Certain custom saddles, crafted for riders carrying money, documents, or other valuables, hid narrow compartments inside the horn, or swells. A fitted leather cap blended seamlessly with the stitching. A twist or subtle lift revealed a chamber meant for tiny but precious things. A derringer, folded bills, cartridges, a slim knife, or a secret letter. Even small keepsakes from home found their way into these hollows, safe from prying eyes and safer still from wandering hands. The saddle went everywhere the rider went, rarely out of reach, never far from his touch. Unlike saddlebags, which could be searched or slipped off a horse in seconds, the horn sat protected under a cowboy's hand, shielded by instinct and habit. Some long-haul drovers used these compartments to keep wages safe while passing through dangerous towns. Others hid spare ammunition or messages meant only for trusted allies. And a few simply liked knowing they carried a piece of home in the one place no thief could easily find. A saddle carried a cowboy across the West. A hidden horn compartment carried the one thing he couldn't lose, or let anyone else find. 15 hidden weapons and pieces of gear, each one proof that real cowboys didn't ride with clean coats and tidy holsters. They rode rough country with blades and hat brims, guns and blankets, iron tucked into books and saddles. Every scratch and dent told a story of survival, not ceremony. If you made it this far, you already know the frontier wasn't a legend. It was a long road where smart men hid the steel that kept them alive. Hit subscribe, and next time we'll dig into the gear and forgotten tools the West kept out of sight even longer than these.